sinister, uncharted forest deep within colonial Africa draws adventurers into its haunted depths in the Vorrh, a dreamlike epic that entangles history and new weird fiction. And that's the book I'm reviewing on this episode of SFF180. Hello everybody, welcome once again. Thank you so much for joining me. Thomas here, your host, as always. It's only after you've experienced, and notice I did not say read, something like Brian Catling's The Vorrh, that you really begin to appreciate just how rare it is to encounter a novel that completely blows up our preconceptions of what fantastic literature can even be. The Vorrh is a sprawling, expansive, fierce piece of storytelling, transporting us to locations both alien and familiar. It's a complex beast of a book, avoiding convention and demanding very attentive reading, but it's never as hard to follow as a lot of other epic fantasies can be, such as, say, some of Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen novels. It can be as frustrating as it is dazzling. It simply opens up your head like a nutcracker, and I'd say that to date, it's one of the 21st century's few truly great works of fantastic fiction. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a book for absolutely everyone, but you'll figure that out soon enough. Brian Catling himself is a professor of art at Oxford. He has mainly worked as a painter, a poet, and a performance artist, and his writing in the Vorrh is breathtakingly visual, using words as brushstrokes in a way that never really feels like stylistic affectation. It's as if the novel hasn't been written so much as painted or sculpted into being. The story is mainly set in the early 20th century in a fictional colonial African city named Essenwald, which has been transported from Europe and reconstructed on-site brick by brick. Now, colonialism and the exploitation of native peoples is a thematic undercurrent throughout the book, and Essenwald has already had to squelch one rebellion in a conflict called the Possession Wars. The city is situated at the edge of a vast, uncharted forest called the Vorrh, of which it is said no man has ever crossed it and lived to tell the tale. The Vorrh is home to terrifying creatures, and it may be the home of dark spirits or some malevolent and inexplicable force that first drains your memory and then your very soul. As the tale unfolds, elements of the supernatural and the magical are doled out just sparingly enough that when they occur, they're truly alarming. But several people do attempt to cross the Vorrh, or at least enter it. One is the Englishman Peter Williams, now known as the Bowman, for the bow that he carries, that he has built literally from the mortal remains of his native lover, the seeress named Este. Now, through the bow, she guides him along his path where his memory fails, as he follows the paths set by the arrows that he just shoots into the air and into the heart of the Vorrh. The Bowman is being relentlessly tracked by the assassin Sungali, a native instigator of the Possession Wars, who has been promised amnesty in exchange for Williams' death. But Williams is also just as doggedly being protected by Sidrus, a physically imposing and merciless killer whose motives remain kind of opaque. In Essenwald, other characters will decide that their destinies, or at least some sort of revelation to give their lives a sense of meaning and purpose, are to be found within the Vorrh. Most prominent of these is the Cyclops Ishmael, who has been raised in the basement of a decrepit old mansion in the city where he has been educated by a set of automatons. The house is run by someone who remains invisible and yet somehow seems omniscient, managing through some means to observe every single activity that goes on in the house, sending instructions and supplies by mail. Ishmael's life takes on a fateful turn when he meets the rebellious young woman Gertrude, who has broken into the house simply out of curiosity and just pure defiance of her regimented upper-class ladylike upbringing. She finds herself drawn to rather than repulsed by the Cyclops, who is simultaneously sensitive and insatiable, emotionally, intellectually, and sexually. She introduces him to the world outside the house that he has never visited. Along with his invented cast, Catling makes room for actual historical figures. One of them, the French surrealist Raymond Roussel, appears in the story as the Frenchman, and his idealistic romanticism ends up being no match at all for the frightening realities in the forest. Now, it happens to be that Roussel's own real-life novel, Impressions of Africa, was the source and the inspiration for the Vorrh. And what Catling has done here is he's cynically made the man basically the victim of his own creation. We also meet the notorious pioneering photographer Edward Muybridge, whose scenes comprise some of the book's most striking storytelling, even though they take place entirely in Europe and America, and they do not at first really seem to have anything to do with the events unfolding in Essenwald and in the forest. But they do share recurring motifs throughout the book, such as the power dynamic within human sexuality and the importance of sight. All through the book we are repeatedly drawn to Catling's fixation with our often unreliable visual relationship to our world, which I guess is a natural fascination for a painter. There are a few elements in the story that will be familiar to fantasy readers. The premise of a mysterious place of untamed nature will resonate with fans of Robert Holdstock's Mythago Wood or Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy. But Catling unfolds his story at an unhurried pace, and for the most part he shows admirable resistance to cliché and convention, and he writes with a very striking and authoritative, distinctive voice. The first book in a planned trilogy, The Vorrh, does leave several questions unresolved, and its multi-character mosaic plot never really coalesces as a whole and builds towards, for example, the kind of single grand climax we might have wished for. But the overall effect of the book puts it in a class by itself. Lyrical, brutal, uncompromising, often violent, but just as often tender and funny. The Vorrh will be an irresistible lure to anybody who really wants to put to the test just how adventurous a reader they think they are. But remember, you enter the forest at your own risk. And that is all I have time for on this episode of SFF180, everybody. Thank you so much once again for joining me. Remember, the most important thing, these are reviews. You will not always agree with me, but if you enjoyed watching, please leave a like, share this video far and wide with your SFF reading friends, and above all, please subscribe to the channel. That is how SFF180 grows. And until I see all of you next time, happy reading.